I have to tell you something. Istanbul may be the most alive city I've ever been in. 24 hours a day, whether you want to participate or not, it is amazing. It made me wonder about the level of optimism that exists here. I have a question. In fact, I have 3 questions for you. If you became the CEO of your company, or maybe you are, especially if it's small, do you believe that you would be able to move toward the values and the way of operating a business that you believe it should have? If you were CEO, do you believe you could make that movement? Let's see your show of hands. Raise your hand. Do you believe you could do that? Okay. A little more. I'm going to keep my hand here for a second. All right. How many of you do not believe that you could? Even if you had the power of that position, that you could not make the moves and the changes that you know need to happen? How many believe no, you could not do that? All right, so let's take the 3rd question. How many of you don't know? You have no idea whether you could do it or not. No idea. No, have no idea. Now, there are probably a variety of reasons for that. Some of it is you don't know all the hows, but I always find it amazing that we sit here in a room like this wanting changes to happen, and if we actually had the authority, or at least the perceived authority, could we move things? So I have to tell you a story. I met a man named Chad Holliday in 1977. Chad became chairman, CEO, and president of DuPont Corporation, a Fortune 100 company, 20 years later. I worked with him all of those years in between as he went to different businesses. But in 1997, maybe it was 99, he called me and he said, all right, I have all the titles now. I'm chairman, CEO, and president, and I feel like I'm swimming in mud. And what he meant by that, he explained, was, well, now I have close to 20 direct reports. I've never had that many direct reports. I have 24 business units, and then, of course, that's not counting all the sub-business units. We have objectives up the kazoo. We have over 200,000 product offerings. And what I need now is a way to roll all of that up into one focus, because I feel like I'm exhausted trying to keep track of that many things, and I know the people who work for me are also. He said, I need it to be like one thing that the whole thing is. And I said, yeah, hole in one. You play golf, right? He said, yeah, hole in one. I said, well, you know, it turns out that you can't just roll things up from all these fragmented pieces you just described to me. That's what I might call the Humpty Dumpty theory, where you have a whole egg, you drop the egg, it breaks, and you have the theory that you could put it all back together and put them back on the wall and have a whole piece. It's really more like what I might call a seed theory, where you have a seed that has in it all the knowledge that's needed to grow a tree, and when it's planted and tended, it becomes a part of every leaf, every branch, and the whole of a tree. You have to start with what the seed is. And he said, let's do that. I said, okay. But you have to understand there is one concept that you have to get, which you know, but you've never applied it to business, which might be called a core organizing concept. That core organizing concept you learned in school when you had to write a paper. The teacher said, what's your thesis? And everything's supposed to derive from that. Or if you were a researcher or are a researcher, we want to know what your hypothesis is before you start. If you're writing a proposal, people want a problem statement. All of those are a way of trying to get you to focus, which is what Chad was asking for. How do you focus everything into one way of looking, and then everything else derives from that? So they grew about 12% net margins each over the next 3 years, because now they were working at where they were so differentiated, but they were also doing it with that which was responsible. So we have a unifying force. Now what gets really fun And I shared with you a little bit about how they sold businesses. One of them was the fibers business, and they worked with the board of directors. Now, one of the things people say is the boards are really hard to convince because it's all about the shareholder getting money, right? Well, because they had a new corporate direction, they were able to do a significant amount of educating of the board, and they brought 150 people into task forces which had full access to the business as a result of this idea, this force idea, which was managing risk and working where things were fragile and where it needed systemic intelligence. The board actually got behind it, and Chad became one of the founders of the UN Global Compact. Any of you members of the UN Global Compact? Are your companies? Right. Now, you know probably how limited that is in some ways. All it requires is the company to be transparent. But part of what Chad and the idea of managing risk said was, if we can see it, we can manage it. So they began to reimagine agriculture and put markers in so you could tell if things were GMO. They decided not to say it was good or bad, just make it possible to know. Chad at that point also told every executive he had, these 20 direct reports, that all of them were to go work on embedding this essence, this managing risk, using innovation in fragile places with systemic intelligence to embed it in everything. And again, they had a mandate that they were supposed to bring in, and they did, an increased revenue of about, and it was 35 to 65, so I averaged out to 45 over the next 5 years. Financial return, embedding responsibility. But they couldn't have done it without this idea of a central organizing concept, and it started with understanding what the essence of the business was, stating what the global imperatives were, and then finding where their unique niche was, their intersection to make it work. So let's look at then what do you do with that. This is a little more about the global imperatives. I want to give you a couple of examples of what they did with global imperatives. So they looked at the planetary things and the social things. This is one of the ones they wrote. Each place has an essence. Of course, we've done the essence work. Am I hitting myself? What am I? I'm making a lot of noise. Each place has an essence. It's alive and unique. And to thrive, that essence must be regenerated in the work we do. I don't have time to tell you all the details of what we did in Australia to go really rethink how it was you do mining and transform the mining industry and actually create a proprietary process that still has them own that market, but to stop by 90% the mountain they took down. That's significant. They used to have to take down huge amounts of the mountain. That story is in depth in my book, The Responsible Business, which Chad Holliday wrote the foreword to, because he said it made so much difference in how they ran a business. In the social systems, they said democracy works when people have critical thinking skills and personal mastery of their state of being. I mean, how would a corporation say that? But they said, we don't work if democracy doesn't work. So they decided to start adding education to everything they did. Every time they sold product, they went in with an education campaign about what global imperatives were, how they got there with critical thinking skills, and they taught people personal self-mastery and said in order to manage risk, they had to learn to do that. So these were global imperatives they began to embed. Again, more responsibility for democracy, responsibility for each place as being alive. So we're back here to these three aspects which allow us to really begin to hone in on an organizing concept. Then what do we do with it? So we create something called a strategic corporate direction. You embed it, there are 18 core places or core aspects of a business. There are 6 that are strategic, 6 that are about leadership, and 6 that are about work design. You can take this idea, this essence, this organizing concept, and you embed it in every part of the business. So you embed it in growth pursuits, and I told you a couple DuPont is doing, where they're working with changing seeds. They're also working on farm fishing, because they said, we are doing that so badly that we're wrecking rivers and streams. We know about managing risk, we should go figure that out. You embed it in performance indices, and we'll look at slightly one of those that are for financial effectiveness. But these are the 6 strategic arenas that Chad told everybody. I want performance measures embedding this. I want all of the growth strategy, everything we do is new, every business model, every marketing platform we create, every product offering, and every time we decide to grow or build something new, I want this essence embedded in it. Now, if you can get the picture here of what he's doing, he is, instead of rolling things up into one, he's starting with one, the essence and the corporate direction, and he's pervasively moving that out into the organization. I'll give you an example here of how it relates to earnings margins and cash flow. So we use the idea of essence and corporate direction to manage the growth of earnings margins and cash flow. This is a very financial effective system. So let's just take margins. I mentioned that they grew their margins net margins about 12% over the next few years, and in many cases they were able to grow revenue up to 65%. The way they did that is because the way margins grow is from product distinctiveness. There are three things under that, but let's just take product distinctiveness. And they said, what can our managing risk capacity do to create product distinctiveness? Well, they increasingly moved up the difficulty scale, up the systemic demand scale, and sold products that had margins that were higher and higher because nobody else could do it. And nobody could integrate the responsibility into it as well as the financial part. This was a charter to all of his direct reports. All of our financials ought to be driven from this. Now, the next thing we do is we look at how do you build it into leadership. So I'll give you one example from here. Can't go through all of them, but culture, as you know, eats strategy for lunch. You've probably heard that before, right? It's a great statement. It's true. The culture can destroy any strategy you have. So one of the things that Chad required was regular celebrations where individuals shared the stories of what they were doing with this essence, this core organizing concept, this idea of managing risk and bringing their own creativity to it. And he had celebrations which were not the corporation telling what it achieved, but individuals talking about what they had created using this, what we call essence to essence relation. My essence as a worker, and some of these folks who were running lines that were ending up in the manufacture of airbags for cars, other paint on buildings, but the idea for the cultural rituals was to make sure those stories were being told, they were being published, and other people could see how individual uniqueness could be brought to it. The final place I'd like to show you is in work systems, because we did some radical redesign of DuPont work systems in order to embed managing risks and this idea of working where life is fragile and where systemic intelligence is needed. I create something with businesses, and we had more luck with this in this particular case with DuPont than I had had up until that time. We install the working of teams not around internal production, but around supporting that which is outside. The customer has a life, and how is it you make their life better? We take everybody and put them on a team that becomes responsible for what are their risks. What is it they have to understand? Where can we bring something that only we can bring? And it fits with our core organizing concept, our corporate direction. Teams, they were still running the regular business work they did all day, but they were on a team outside. Plus, there was one other thing we asked of each of them. We asked everybody, and Chad did this too, to create a promise beyond ableness. I bet that didn't translate. Promise beyond ableness. It's not skill, it's not ability. It's like it's just so far outside of my ability to know how to do it. It's like you promising that you're going to reverse climate change or some set of that. We ask every person inside of DuPont in every business to create a promise beyond ableness. And all of them had to embed these global imperatives, the managing risk direction, and their intersection, and they had to almost go to like venture capital committees, we'd call them now, and get approval for it. And then they had to measure and track and see how well they pulled it off. So you can see what we're starting with is this idea of one corporate direction, which comes out of the uniqueness of the business, the global imperatives, which is the responsibility, and an intersection, which is usually mostly what a business will do. And they make that pervasive throughout the 18 core arenas, 6 from strategy, 6 from leadership, and 6 from work systems. And you make that so pervasive that, as Chad said, I never had people coming in with their own agenda anymore. Because people came to work for DuPont because they loved the fact that we created safety. Safety became a whole business for them. And it's hard to remember this, so we were going back 200 years. I just met, where's Tolga? Has SOSrooms.com, are you in the room? Maybe he's not. He got to meet Tolga. He's got a wonderful business, been around for 3 years, and right now his essence and that uniqueness is so alive when he describes it to you, I immediately want to go book a room using it, because I can give money to a charity and Expedia fulfills the work. What happens though is people lose that. Like I'm working with Google right now, because 20 years ago when it was founded, they knew what they were about, but they're beginning to lose it and become fragmented. George Lucas would have a fit, right? What I think is that, and what I've seen over the 40 years I've been doing this, I'm old, and doing this with over 100 different business units, is once you get this organizing concept made out of essence coming in, the global imperatives being clear, and the singularity intersections, it allows you to discover a really developmental corporate direction that can make a huge difference. And you're no longer fighting the battle, do we do the responsible thing or do we do the financially big thing? So I want to tell you how to stay connected with me. If you would like, I have a workbook I would love to give everyone here, and all I ask is if you buy The Responsible Entrepreneur and just send me the receipt, I'll give you the workbook free. I could give it to you anyway, but it wouldn't do you any good unless you had the book, because you wouldn't know what I was referring to. So please let me know. And if you want to know more about, you can also buy the other book. I've got a workbook for it too, if you would like. You can subscribe to my newsletter and you get more stuff than you may want, but you get choices. I have another book, The Responsible Human, which will be out in the fall. And I also have communities of people who continue to have these conversations with one another. So these are the ways we can stay in touch, and I will be here today and tomorrow. So please come talk to me and ask me more questions about all the people that I've mentioned and the stories I've told. Thank you.